Hello, welcome back to IPBC Asia 2013. One of the topics of discussion at this year's conference, as you would expect, is the so-called non-practicing entities, the NPEs, those companies that help to license and derive more value out of other people's intellectual property, other people's patents. One such company represented here is Conversant, a company which previously was called MOSAID. The President and Chief Executive, John C. Lindgren, is sitting here in the chair opposite me. Thanks so much for coming over, John.
Thanks for having me.
So, firstly, your name now is Conversant, and if you go to your website, you'll see a little video clip explaining what you do. And the tone of the video seems very much to be a more congenial, collegiate approach to deriving value for IP holders rather than, I suppose, what might be more the aggressive or adversarial approach. Is that also why you chose the new name Conversant, because it indicates more of a boardroom than a courtroom approach?
Exactly. That's first of all, the former name MOSAID was actually an acronym that stood for Metal Oxide Semiconductor Assistance in Design, and really no longer reflects our core business. We do a lot in the semiconductor area, both in terms of R&D, and we have a large number of semiconductor patents, but we've expanded well beyond that. And plus it was very difficult for people to pronounce as well. So Conversant, we went through a long process to choose that name, and what we wanted to evoke in the consumer of the information was that we are conversational in our approach to things, just like you said, a congenial approach to patent licensing, not a litigious, hard, aggressive approach. We want to start conversations with the counterparties and actually produce the most logical resolution we can on an amicable basis. Secondly, Conversant also invokes the feeling of knowledge. If you're conversant in a technology, you're knowledgeable in that technology. We're conversant in many technologies, many different ways of partnering with patent holders to maximize returns, many ways to be conversant in different ways to reach resolution with licensees.
Still, you came from Texas Instruments. You spent 20 years there, among others, reverse engineering competitors' chips to see how much of TI's technology was included in them, to see whether there had been patent infringements. I mean, that seems to be a fairly aggressive background, if I can put it that way. You were chief litigator. I mean,
well, we did.
Have you now gone away from that? Was there something that was off-putting about that old approach that's driven you towards the new one?
So I take a little issue with that. I think TI was aggressive when it needed to be, but most of the license agreements that I worked on at Texas Instruments were fully negotiated outside of the courtroom. And I think we've carried that tradition over since my time, certainly at MOSAID and now Conversant. We've been in litigation a very small percentage of the time. The vast majority of our licenses have been signed without ever the threat of litigation occurring, much less actual litigation. And we'd like to continue that. We think litigation is a very inefficient way of solving a dispute between two parties, and it can really get aggressive when we think there's a better way to do things.
Which, in this day and age, when there's so much focus on the NPEs, and you have all sorts of companies springing up, which really do take a fairly litigious route, the ones that Barack Obama, I suppose, is reacting to with his recent litigation. Do you think that the industry is doing itself a disservice by having this aggressive approach in some quarters?
Well, absolutely. There are good actors and bad actors among all NPEs, and I think that's the source of this label called patent trolls. There are certain entities that deserve that, and then certain entities that certainly do not. And to lump them all together is the wrong approach. And I think that's reflected in a couple of things. One is we've recently entered into press releases and public campaign around patent licensing principles. We believe that all entities who assert patents, whether you're an NPE or an operating company, should live up to certain minimum standards. And I think that will distinguish us from the bad actors in the business and focus the debate much more on strengthening the U.S. patent system rather than trying to weaken the entire system to address certain anecdote problems.
But what can you really do about it? I mean, apart from press releases, are you using the opportunity here, for example, at IPBC to kind of pat a few people on the back and say, hey, you're giving all of us a bad name?
We certainly are. We're very aggressive in saying, look, sign up to these principles or be labeled as a bad actor. And I think some of these principles are so self-evident that it's very difficult for people to disagree with them. And yet, for example, do due diligence before you assert a patent, whether it's in litigation or across a boardroom table. Make sure that you've done your homework. Reverse engineer the product. Make sure you can identify every single element of every claim that you're asserting. And make sure that the patent is not going to fall to an easy search of the prior art. Make sure the claims are definite. Share the information and the evidence of use with the other side. Don't hide it. And so just be transparent in your dealings with the other side.
You're right, these do sound obvious.
Don't hide the ownership of the patent. That sounds obvious as well, and yet many companies are still using shell companies and hiding the true ownership behind the patents. We feel that's not the right way to operate.
At worst, what could be the result?
I think what you're going to get is a splintering of the industry. Some people are going to say, that's easy for you to say, but because I have only business method patents, I need to take a different approach. And that's where you get the danger of the opponents of all patent entity assertions, the people that would like to have free operations without any intellectual property in the world, that might actually do some serious damage to the patent system. Luckily, the current debates in Washington are much more balanced, and the Goodlatte bill is a good example of this.
What about in other markets, particularly here in Asia, where I guess this litigious, aggressive attitude from the US hasn't yet filtered in? Is there a way that those countries which don't yet have the sophistication and the maturity in their IP markets can circumvent this altogether? That they don't, in the same way that in some African countries, before they install fixed line telephony, they're cutting straight to 4G mobile telephony. Is there a way that some of these emerging economies can bypass this fairly painful process of the patent trolls?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult. For the most part, the companies that focus on Asia sales and don't export a lot are not going to be bothered by many patent assertion activities. For example, Chinese companies that sell only in China. It's when they start to export into the United States and subject themselves to U.S. patent law that they've just got to be prepared to build this into their business model, that they're going to have to pay their fair share for the use of others' intellectual property. But I think one thing that I would advise all the Asian companies that are planning such actions to do is to think ahead. Start to arm yourself with your own patent portfolio to be able to balance operating companies that are going to be competitors in the future.
And if Barack Obama was sitting here in front of you, what would you say to him about his patent laws?
I would say be very careful with your overly broad statements that could damage the underlying system in the United States. We are a knowledge-based economy, and anything you do to damage our very strong patent enforcement system is bad for the U.S.
It's great to talk to you. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you very much.
John Lindgren, the President and Chief Executive of Conversant, formerly MOSAID, here at IPBC Asia 2013.